So the Daily Mirror is running, of course, with the 322 conservatives voted against a motion by the Labour Party to let the hungriest children have free school meals. And it says in this piece on the front page by Lizzie Buchan, political correspondent of the Daily Mirror, heartless Tories defeated a bid by Marcus Rashford to extend free school meals over the holidays for our poorest kids. Boris Johnson dodged pleas to guarantee meals until Easter, as hard-up families struggle in the second wave. After the Commons bid was defeated by 322 votes to 261, Labour MP Kate Green said the Tories had badly let down more than 1 million children and their families. Now, this is only tip of the iceberg. Tip of the iceberg, because that is, the Tories don't recognize society, and it wasn't a joke. When Margaret Thatcher said there is no such thing as society, she really meant it. So, the question is not about these details. This is not news to us, and this is not news when looked at contextually and on the basis of their records. The Tories don't recognize society and never have done. The Tories, whatever the history of the last 400 years or 500 years inside Britain, the Conservatives or the Tories have never believed in society. Now, this is fact. Every major incident, every major kind of move that the Tories in power have made, and every narrative they have supported, whether in power or not, points to the fact that they don't recognize society, and that includes they don't recognize the planet, they don't recognize the environment, they don't recognize the billions of creatures being destroyed and murdered, massacred on the planet. So the question is not about the details of what they're doing to deprive the poorest children and the poorest people of the north and other places, other parts of England. That is not the question. That is not surprising. That is what should happen if they are given no opposition. And they have not been given opposition. That's the question. Why have the Tories been allowed to exist and operate as a political party? That is the question. It's not about the details. Why? Because the Daily Mirror saying so cruel. It is cruel, but it is only a tip of the iceberg of cruelty mountain that the Tories have ready to unleash on society. So the question is, why are the Tories in existence at all? Why aren't the Tories, in whatever form, why aren't the Tories out of business? And that is the question for the Labour Party or any other kind of opponent of the behavior and the agenda and the purpose and the character of the Tories. The Tories are cruelty. It's not just cruel on this particular motion. The Tories are personifications, embodiments of cruelty. Not on one issue, on every issue. So the answer to that question, why are they in business, is to be found in the fact that the majority of the Labour Party leadership has been crypto-conservative, right-wing, cruel. And the style, the manner in which one leader, at the expense of the Labour Party, the founding aims of the Labour Party, one leader, Neil Kinnock, the way he spoke and the kind of emphasis on his hatefulness that he applied against the society supporting parts of the Labour Party, what is also known as the old Labour, so-called. The manner, the actual kind of body language of Neil Kinnock gives a lot away about his complete contempt for the founding aims of the Labour Party. Kinnock and Prescott, two of the thugs that have been on the front kind of benches of the Labour Party, typify other thugs like James Callaghan. So these criminals, together and separately, have been responsible for the continued existence in political kind of life of the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party is not just a conservative party like conserving what is good. The Conservative Party has been operating against what is good, what is society, what is human and humane, what is compassionate, and what is caring. So Jeremy Hunt making a stunt today about saving the care homes and averting the catastrophe of the care homes and outlining 70 billion pounds as the cost of that aversion is not impressing us with any suggestion that he is genuine. And in any case, Hunt will never get there, even if he has changed for tactical reasons, for opportunistic reasons, his stance against society. Because the Conservative Party essentially is a cruel criminal operation. And the fact that the Daily Mirror is running this headline and this display on the front page after Wednesday's 322 Conservative MPs voting against helping poorest children does not alter the fact, the running kind of narrative, the running agenda operated through the Daily Mirror itself and the Mirror Group newspapers as a whole, that is Sunday People, Sunday Mirror. Because the Mirror Group newspapers commercially, tactically are opposed to the rivals, the Daily Mail, the Sun, and to a lesser extent, the Daily Express. But the Daily Express and the Star are owned by the same company that owns the Daily Mirror and the Mirror Group newspapers. So there is less competition from the Daily Star and the Daily Express for that reason. But there is clear competition from the tabloid rivals in Fleet Street, rivals to the Daily Mirror, which is the Daily Mail and the Scum. Now, the Daily Mirror Group or the Daily Mirror Group as a group and as the daily paper as well, has not challenged, not even in this one, has not challenged the ideology and the ideological kind of purpose and the force that the Conservative 322 that voted are moved by, propelled by. And unless the force that moves them and propels them is examined and exposed, the Tories cannot be stopped. This is in addition to what we have said about Corbyn being stupid and Corbyn's idiotic collusion with Johnson, who was given the election for the 12th of December 2019. Corbyn was a colluder with the Conservatives in the essential kind of judgment based on evidence. As we have said, the reason why we call Corbyn the garden gnome is not because of the absence of alternative words and phrases. Garden gnome is meant to be a dead person sitting there, or a kind of inanimate kind of idol or doll sitting there. And that is what the role of Jeremy Corbyn was as the incumbent in the post of leader of the opposition, the leader of the Labour Party. And as we have said, and for anyone who is new to this and watching this for the first time, we illustrated Corbyn's being politically dead and stupid by referring to hundreds of occasions, separate occasions, during the calendar years that he was in post as leader of the Labour Party. Hundreds of occasions when Jeremy Corbyn ran away from assembled television crews, mainly television broadcasting crews and other, quote, reporters. Now, what is wrong with that? There may be a counter to that observation along the following lines, that because the media was against him anyway, so why would he talk to them? Well, that is exactly a valid part of the question and answer or explanation. But that's not the whole answer. That's not the main answer. That's not the main explanation. Because, of course, in a society like Britain, which is still imperialistic and corrupt to the core in the racist way that it is operated and controlled, the media is controlled by the opponents of the ideology that supports the existence of society and all the rights and entitlements and support that society entails. Now, what do you do when you are faced with that kind of society and that kind of one-sided right-wing, anti-societal and anti-social media, mainstream media? You don't ignore them and you don't boycott them. You engage with them and you put the evidence in front of them and let them suppress you, because regardless of whether you run away or not, they will suppress you anyway and they will demonize you. So the better option practically is to spell it out, why they are wrong and why the alternative is right and why the Labour Party's founding aims are the right ones for society. And Corbyn failed to do that. Corbyn failed to speak to the assembled crowd, and he ran, he sprinted. He literally sprinted, ran away to the waiting car or vehicle and disappeared. Now that was Corbyn's stupidity. It wasn't an accident, one-off, only one occasion, or only on some occasions. Corbyn was unfit intellectually. He didn't understand this process and these dynamics that I have just again outlined and summarized. This is my analysis and the Khoodeelaar campaign's analysis, and we have been absolutely vindicated by everything that has happened since the totally stupid promotion of Corbyn as a candidate for Labour Party leadership. Because in leadership, he kind of undermined the appeal of the principle underlying the foundation of the Labour Party. And he did that through crucial years when the Conservatives got hold of more votes and more kind of propaganda targets, and that they did more damages to society and to democracy and to the cause of the people who need society, like the millions who have been literally starved. They are being the Conservatives are starving millions of people, not just children. adults as well. And so the fault lies with the Labour Party, and the fault lies with the likes of the Daily Mirror, the Guardian. Of course, the Guardian is absolutely dubious and completely dishonest. The Mirror cannot afford to be as dubious as the Guardian because of the popular base in circulation that it has across the North. The Guardian is the voice or the organ, accepting sometimes, like the early 1990s when it conducted the investigation into Neil Hamilton and Muhammad Al-Fayed and Jonathan Aitken, one relative, distant one descendant of Beaverbrook. Of course, Aitken was not connected with the Express, but he's a descendant of Aitken. Beaverbrook's original name is Aitken. And so that time, and also the kind of investigation that the Guardian carried about the phone hacking that led to, or that significantly contributed to the setting up of the Levison inquiry by David Cameron. Scam moron, that is Cameron, David Cameron. He's a racist, scammers, and a moron, and a completely shameless crook who is in receipt of hundreds of millions of pounds from the Chinese. Now, why would the Chinese want to pay him hundreds of millions of pounds? Surely there is some secret there. And the Labour Party has failed, as has the Mirror Group, to raise questions about this criminal scam that Cameron has been involved in and is involved in, and the role that Cameron played in setting up the Brexit disaster in the first place. And the Labour Party is also silent, very silent, despite overwhelming evidence on the corruption via Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, and others that benefited the agenda that the Tories have actually pocketed and grabbed. The whole idea of the Brexit Party was a sham. It was a complete con. It was a device created by the crook, Nigel Nasty Farage, in order to keep the Conservatives in power. And the Labour Party has not shown any public evidence that it understood. And Corbyn's stupidity is in the fact that he's still silent about Farage. Not only has Corbyn been silent about the kind of sabotage of democracy and society perpetrated by the likes of Farage, but his number one fan, self kind of declared fan, George Galloway, has been begging, literally begging Nigel Nasty, racist, anti-Muslim Farage to accept him as his follower. And Farage has been so confident that he has done open snubbing of George Galloway. So that is the pathetic state of the so-called opposition, political opposition in this country. So anyone, including the so-called Momentum founders and his cabal, any pretense that they are about to commit some kind of, or stage some kind of socialist revolution in this country is worse than infantile stupidity. And they caused severe damage by propping up Jeremy Corbyn against the Labour Party right-wingers. Instead of having a debate in the communities, across the communities, the Labour Party has failed to hold a debate. In fact, the Labour Party, as in the case of Tower Hamlets, where the Central Labour Party put the Tower Hamlets Labour Party on special measures. That is to say, the Labour Party centrally, in effect, took decisions for 20 years or so. So the membership of the Labour Party in Tower Hamlets was rubber membership, bogus membership in the context of democracy, accountability, and representativeness. And I, as a member of the Labour Party, was and have been for the last 50 years or so, almost 50 years, the vocal opposition to all these crooks in the Labour Party, all the corruption by the Labour Party, all the betrayals and denials and racism via the Labour Party in Tower Hamlets. And I shall not list my kind of examples, evidence. On this edition, we shall be doing that update because I have mentioned it before, but the next versions, the next updates will be broadcast in due course when it is considered possible to accommodate the full factual details in one edition or in the relevant editions. Suffice to say for the time being now that the disaster of having an anti-democratic mayor post created in Tower Hamlets was made possible by the fact that the Labour Party was absolutely all over the place. So the Labour Party knew, or the persons with some brains, both locally in Tower Hamlets and also centrally in the Labour Party posts, including in the NEC, knew that the crooks that were mobilizing to foist this anti-democratic post on the borough. And they didn't do anything. Well, they didn't do anything is not expressive enough, communicative enough. I gave them advice, chapter and verse, at every stage. And they lied. They lied to me and they lied to the community. They lied to the voters. And the referendum, about whether to have an elected mayor post, the referendum was divided by two into yes and into no. We oppose the creation of the mayor. I oppose the creation of the mayor post. And every time I spoke to anyone, including those holding position as, quote, leader of the Labour group or Labour Party in Tower Hamlets, I was lied to. I knew that the yes side was going to hijack the result and get a yes vote majority. So I gave timely, regular, daily warnings and practical kind of clues as to how we could stop them. And I was lied to and I was falsely, dishonestly kind of reassured by the ones holding positions in the name of the Labour Party, in the Labour group on the council, as well as outside. And I was told that we would win and we would defeat the yes side. It turned out after the kind of referendum result that I was the only one who was genuinely opposed to it, and the Labour Party as a whole, which was saying it was opposing, was actually quite prepared to accept the imposition of the mayor post. This remains the fact. Anyone watching this who has any evidence to kind of differ with me as the summary of the facts I have given here is most welcome to point this out to me in a lawful and valid kind of communication, and I shall review and update if necessary. Otherwise, it stands. So the Labour Party in Tower Hamlets is in the hands of crooks, has been in the hands of crooks and morons, as has been the Labour Party nationally, which is why the Conservatives can be as cruel as they have been yesterday and as they have been the whole of the last week. And as they have been, even today, they have been having a fun day today, because they have been saying through this Rishi Sunak, the incumbent in the post of finance minister in the Boris Johnson fronted cabal, he has now issued that money would be available to alleviate poverty and hunger, etc., retrospectively. And Andy Barnum, the Greater Manchester kind of person, has been quoted as saying today, why wasn't that put on the table during the negotiation with the Prime Minister, that is Boris Johnson? That is a clue. That is a clue of the complete corrupt behavior and lack of morality or ethics by the cons. They're forever lying, and they're stealing, and they're thieving. Because their cruelty against the North and against Liverpool and against Greater Manchester and against the Northeast has been spotted by ordinary people who know that next time they won't. A lot of ordinary people who voted for Brexit and voted for the Brexit get done kind of mantra that the liar Boris Johnson kind of mouthed in the run up to the 12th of December 2019 election charade, they are not going to vote for her. Many of these people are not going to vote for the Conservatives. The question is, will that be enough? And the answer is not possible, because unless the Labour Party takes over the narrative, the commentary, and the analysis, and it does so rigorously, evidentially, factually, truthfully, morally, transparently, democratically, every single hour of the day, from now until whenever the next so-called election takes place. So we shall be talking more about that aspect of the disaster later. We go back to the question of the private eye kind of admitting that Croydon Council has been hijacked for a number of years, hijacked by a bunch of criminals. Well, this is our phrase. It's not the private eye's language, but that is what has been happening. And also the admission about Ealing Council, where the Ealing Council, and it says, this is the quotation from the private eye. As the last private eye reported, Labour Party controlled Ealing Council lied to residents about whether the London Ambulance Service had been consulted over controversial moves to block off many residential streets with bollards and planters as part of the council's rushed low traffic neighborhood scheme. Now, this is a rare kind of occasion by private eye when it actually admits that any council has lied to residents and interested parties like the London Ambulance Service. And the defect in the Rotten Boroughs column on the page in the private eye is that it doesn't logically kind of follow, if you like, the headline, Rotten Boroughs. If it is doing a fortnightly kind of roundup on rotten, that is corrupt and anti-democratic and crooked councils, then it has to kind of include the role of the community, the voters, the electors, and also the role of the elected councillors. All its coverage, the Rotten Boroughs column, are done by excluding even the existence of other councillors, the ordinary councillors. So private eye itself does not recognize elected councils and councillors. Think about that. So saying it's Rotten Boroughs is only 5% of the truth. 95% of the facts about the behavior of elected councillors is routinely, regularly left out. And I say this as based on decades, let's say nearly 50 years of reading the private eye. It doesn't recognize councillors. In fact, private eye doesn't recognize even the elected members of parliament. So what is wrong with these people? If they are kind of opposed to corruption by councils, if they're opposed to abuses by MPs, how come they don't actually detail the individual MP's behavior? Which is the only way to begin to get a picture of what they're up to, these MPs, the elected MPs or the elected councillors. And anyone who is new to this and may think that this kind of analysis is available elsewhere, let me tell them, this kind of analysis is not available anywhere else. And when the Daily Telegraph accidentally, apparently, stumbled upon the list of MPs that had been engaged in stealing money, public money under expenses in 2008 and 9, that is the time when the Telegraph kind of stumbled upon that mine of information. That showed private eye had been completely asleep and still is asleep. The private eye has not followed up such a giant kind of piece of evidence. I would say that any democratic forum, any ethical forum, any pro-democratic, pro-society, pro-accountability forum and platform should have been continuing to investigate individual MPs' behavior since the expenses scandal was broken by the Telegraph in the first decade of this century, 11 years ago, 12 years ago. And they haven't done that. And going back to the Labour Party's stupidity and stupid leadership, the Labour Party hasn't done that either. Surprise, because many Labour Party MPs were themselves thieves and crooks and criminals. What chance is there, therefore, that the victims of cruelty as exhibited by the Conservatives in the attacks on the North and in their cruel vote against the children getting the free school meals will come to an end by following the democratic kind of process that has been in place onshore? There is no chance. The only chance is if there exists or comes into existence a rigorous and active and consistently rigorous and active fourth estate, that is the mainstream media or the media. Well, currently there is no chance that it will be coming into force, because despite the fact that the Daily Mirror is running this tactically, commercially, strategically kind of convenient headlines, the Mirror will not continue on this mode, and the Mirror will go back to the general mode of colluding with the so-called rivals, the Daily Mail and the Sun, as it will kind of perpetrate and perpetuate the denial of the real truth, which is the truth about the Conservatives being unfit and against the society, and the overwhelming majority of the MPs being completely unfit for democracy, regardless of party power or whatever. So there is no chance of a rigorous, democratic, ethical, truthful fourth estate emerging in the foreseeable future in Britain. So the people that are afflicted by this virus, affected by the virus and affected by poverty of other types and illnesses of other types are not going to get the support that they need. So it's a kind of very depressing reality, and the truth is that this depressing reality serves these people the media, Fleet Street, because they don't actually lose any jobs or anything like that, unless, of course, there is some unusual things going on about the proprietorship of a particular kind of kind of group. Because Fleet Street, I mean, the mainstream media are groups that are not individual titles. That just like the Boris Graph is a group. The Times, the Sun, part of one group. The Express, Mirror, Star, and the Sunday versions, part of the Mirror group. And the Financial Times itself is also part of the group. So there is not really diversity. There is no real kind of ethical diversity, moral diversity, investigative diversity, democratic diversity. All of these titles that I've mentioned and implied and represented are actually part of the same problem, which is the secrecy. The newspapers are not engaged in uncovering the truth. So they are covering up the truth, essentially, which is why this David Rose's piece about this small company is so small that it doesn't have to file full financial accounts to the appropriate kind of body, which is the Companies House, getting 387 million pounds of a contract under the pandemic. This is a rare piece. And this is a rare piece because there has been so much waste of public money under the cover of the pandemic, billions of pounds being pocketed by conservative donors and crooks operating in and around the Conservative Party, that there is a kind of undeniable pressure to leak some of that information, share some of that information, and to stay relevant as journalists or as journals. That is the only explanation for the Daily Mail running that story while denying the cruelty assault on the poorest that the 322 conservative MPs perpetrated yesterday. That is the way to check where they actually lie, where their allegiance lies. And the allegiance still lies with the cruelty perpetrators, the Daily Mail. So that so-called investigative piece by David Rose cuts no ice. It is completely insignificant and irrelevant. And he is not going to get any credits from this campaign that he has broken something. He has not. And we focus on the Fleet Street print titles, but essentially they are carrying the same narrative, the same agenda that is in a different kind of mode perpetrated by the BBC, Sky News, ITV, Channel 4 News, etc. Because, for example, Channel 4 News still pretends to be different, despite the fact that it has not been different at all. And it's kind of stunts, the occasional stunts at being different, meaning they sometimes air pieces that others, like the BBC and the Sky News and ITV, don't. Thus, Channel 4 being able to assert that we broadcast this, they didn't. Doesn't constitute substantial difference in terms of telling the truth to the public about what the ones in power are actually getting up to. For example, this series of disclosures about Cambridge Analytica and Facebook playing key roles in sabotaging democracy in Britain and aiding and abetting the Brexiteers. This whole operation or series of operations included most of the activities done by the perpetrators and operators and operatives engaging in brazen criminality. And none of the criminals has been prosecuted. How is that possible? Answer is because the Labour Party is colluding with the suppression of the truth, as happened when many claims against the criminals, including the fact that Boris Johnson and before him, Theresa May suppressed the Russia report, so-called, and the involvement of Russia and Nigel Farage and all the others in the sabotage of democracy, as ordinarily understood and defined. The Labour Party did not intervene in any way different from the Conservatives. So this is another dimension, another stage, another manifestation of the fact that the Labour Party is not really acting as an answer, let alone as an opposition to the Conservatives' agenda. So again, we say that the future of this country is bleak. Future of democracy in this country is bleak. And there is no sign that the Corbynistas, so-called, which is a completely outrageously overstated kind of level. Corbyn doesn't have an original kind of political attitude or kind of outlook. So therefore, there is no basis for anyone to be his fan or disciple so that they can be called Corbynistas. He doesn't represent anything real, original. So there is no Corbynista, there is no foundation. And the mouthings, various concerns by Corbyn as an MP, he still is an MP, since April when he was replaced by Starmer. Various things that Corbyn has said. April, May, June, July, August, September now, 6 months, 7 months, everything he has said does not come in anywhere near constituting original analysis, original insight, original kind of understanding of the issue concerned, let alone any evidence of his opposing the status quo and the criminals in power. So again, this is another evidence that this society is not being told the truth by the media. It is not being told the truth even by the opposition, despite the, as I said, fact that this kind of headline in the so-called Labour supporting Daily Mirror are appearing. But this is not really down to the Labour Party MPs doing anything, really. It's that football kind of player who has, for some reason, exceptionally for a football player, taken on a socially conscientious role. He did that earlier in the year, and he was kind of successful in a way because he was able to get his demand met by the Conservatives, not because they wanted to, but because that was kind of supported by many of the Conservatives for their own reasons. So the Daily Mirror running this so cruel headline is not down to any MPs at all, Labour Party MPs at all, although for constitutional procedures, even in an unwritten constitution country, there are procedures, constitutional procedures, because the way that a motion is tabled is only possible by a member of parliament. And this football player is not a member of parliament. So he kind of offloaded the demand, and some Labour MPs picked it up and they moved the motion in their names, moved and seconded. But that is their secondary role. That is not their originating role. And so therefore, there is no evidence that there is any original initiatives being taken by any Labour Party MPs, whether they are Corbynistas, Corbyn's supporters, or Keir Starmer servers. And so therefore, we have a bleak prospect in this country of democracy being established. And there is no chance, there is no likelihood, it doesn't look like there is a prospect that Starmer, left to his own devices politically, will create the necessary upheaval and awareness in the country to such a point where the people at an election that may be held will throw out the conservatives. Supposing they did, it doesn't then mean that a Starmer-fronted government, colored as Labour, will deliver the answer, the opposition to the schemes and the measures and the cruelty personified by and in the conservatives. It doesn't follow that at all. And the fact that it won't follow is not based on supposition. There is no evidence locally anywhere in the country, including in Greater Manchester, which is topically in the news and is the leading topical talking point this week. The ordinary councils, the 10 councils that constitute Greater Manchester, are not behaving any differently, accountably, democratically, answerably to their local communities or the communities affected by their behavior, individuals affected by their behavior. And there is no way to know that whatever the extent of the negligence and suppression of the truth from the people and the denial of service to the people in those 10 kind of Greater Manchester councils are, because the newspapers are not really carrying news. As I have said before, in the case of the pandemic and the virus, they don't give the facts of where the virus starts and where it ends. And despite the hundreds of pages of coverage put together, all these newspapers in print every day that mention, the pages contain references to the virus, there is no basic information at all as to what the virus does and how it kind of acts and operates and affects people, attacks people. We shall be continuing in the next edition.